Hi there, it's Aziza, and I just watched the Mohammed El-Bakker documentary, and I really did enjoy most of it. It was very interesting to learn about the life of someone that I grew up with as a recording artist I was familiar with. We had a couple of his records. Um, Overall, I thought it was very well done. I thought there were a few things in there about the music and the nightclub scene that was a little bit off, or maybe in some cases a lot off. Number one, there's a sense that they're saying that the nightclubs somehow existed to just pander to, Westerners, to get them to come, that somehow they twisted, Oriental culture, whatever, the East to suit the West and or change the music, and that is really not the case in the ethnic nightclubs. For instance, like our famed Greektown district in New York City, which was 8th Avenue and 29th Street, there was at one time back in the heyday, a lot of nightclubs going, probably anywhere from 9 to 10, maybe even a little bit more at its height, all within just, a couple of blocks radius. And the musicians that played there played authentic, instruments from the East. And of course, the Greek people were very good at entertaining a lot of different people, really, just out of their, their talent for that welcoming of different people. So they had musicians that were, Turkish, Greek, from the Balkans, Slavic countries. They had Jewish musicians. They had Arabic musicians. And again, when you even take that, consider all the different countries with similar music. Oh, I should say also, yes, Armenian, which is part of my background. I'm on my father's side, uh, Arabic, Armenian, Greek, and Italian. But anyway, yeah, I think I said Armenian. Yeah. So anyway, to make a long story short, you had like the Modelon brothers were Sephardic Jews. You had Mohammed El-Akkad, who was uh, a Muslim from, I believe it was from Egypt. I may be wrong. Camis El-Fino, oud player from Egypt. The list is endless. The Greeks, Anisto, Athanasu, we could just go on all night about that. And New York City, the hub was there in Greektown of the ethnic clubs, but also there were a few scattered in other parts of town during the heyday. Some on the east side of Manhattan, Astoria, Queens, with the Greek population that was there. So anyway, there's a little bit there that's just making it seem like these musicians went in there and said, "Hey, we've got to please these lousy Westerners, expect this out of us," or whatever. Not in those clubs. They played ethnic music. They would play, um, like for instance, maybe a Paso Doble. That was always opening song in Greektown every night was a Paso Doble, which is Spanish. But the instruments were all ethnic. The only thing that could be construed as something that was probably not the best to have, but they would have it certainly a lot of the time was a trap drum, which is not, as nitty gritty as the darbuke, the doumbeg, etc. But other than that, it wasn't like you went in and there were wailing horns and they were doing jazz with people jumping around to jazz music or something. It was authentic Middle Eastern songs. And the reason that some of the musicians, not all of them, some of them like to wear, uh, for certain events and things, actually enjoyed wearing an ethnic costume. One was Camis El-Fino, the oud player, that he and his wife Zizi Ali were very close friends with my mom. Their daughter remembers my mother. Camis loved his authentic outfit. He loved the harem pants, the whole thing, the fez, everything. And someone else associated with us, who did not wear a costume all the time like Camis did, but he loved it, and that was Baba Aydin Aslan of the Balkan Record Shop, who had a long association with us. My mother, Johanna, had the first uh, uh, Middle Eastern folk dance company. As far as she was the first person from Greektown of the dancers to found a regularly performing dance troupe for, banquets on the outside, festivals, what have you, anything. They were professional and they hired musicians like Baba Aydin, and actually Eddie Kochak and Haki Obadia did their charts, I should say, for their act, in case they were somewhere where they did have to hand some music to an orchestra they did not know, to do some backup. So anyway, Baba Aydin was instrumental in designing his outfit, which included a turban, a long vest, and harem pants, certain type of shoes. And he was very specific about how he wanted the sleeves made. So if you see photos of that, you can see that. I mean, he didn't just, he had input into how he wanted to look. So it wasn't like, oh, well, the Americans will like us better if I look like I flew in on a carpet. So, no, that wasn't it at all. It was that we were playing songs and music that was basically handed down through many generations. I mean, people wrote some new songs that made it into the repertoire of, Oriental music, belly dance music, Eastern, Arabic, Turkish, whatever, Greek, what have you. But most of our songs, music that we danced to, were old songs. I mean, this goes back, this stuff was handed down for, eons. Baba Aydin was an expert on music. He even knew songs like, I'll give you an example, from the ancient kingdom of Lydia, which now we're kind of like, oh, okay, well, wow, that was a long time ago. I don't even think they have that country anymore. And you're right, they don't. It's that old, ancient. So we dressed in a manner that suggested more ancient times, because we were not dancing to modern music. We were not performing to that. Now, I want to get to something about what was mentioned about Mike Sarkisian and Freddie Elias. My mother worked with Freddie Elias. He was such a wonderful guy. And I did later at the Averoff, later in my generation and time. and he was a wonderful musician. He could play anything, let me say that. He was that versatile that besides the very Arabian type violin, he played a jazz style violin that was called like hot canary style. That's the old term for, that type of style, which actually I think is also similar to Stefan Grappelli, who was very famous for that, and who I believe he played with Django Reinhardt, if I'm not mistaken. And you can kind of call that like gypsy jazz. But Freddie, if he was playing Oriental music, though, that was not this other thing that he was also good at, that he could do if that's what was requested, maybe at a banquet or whatever. He didn't play that. He played Oriental music for belly dancing that was Arabian. And it didn't really, to give you an example, I bought a record album one time that said, because I collect records, I used to, now not so much, but, and it said on one side it was it was a very awful, campy record. It said on one side was for striptease artists, burlesque, and said on side two was like, some kind of for like veil dancing, like meaning belly dancing. I forget how they termed it. And I thought, well, I have no clue what's on this record. So I'm just going to buy it and see what's on it. So one side was this violin and drums and stuff going at breakneck speed. If you tried to dance to it, you would have broken your leg. It would, it was just way not belly dance music. And in fact, it was not Balkan or Turkish belly dance music. It was more like, if you took the line dance, the hora, which the Jews call the hora, the Greeks call the hasapo cervico, Arabs call it the kasap, etc., so on. The Russians do it, jumping around. That's a line dance. So it's as if you had this line dance on acid with a lot of jazz thrown in. But, where the record maker, long story short, it was Freddie and Mike, and they were doing something they were probably asked to do for this recording, or heaven forbid this record company stole their tracks. Who knows? That happened too sometimes. You have to watch. That there were some thefts or, things like that. So anyway, this was not belly dance music. And of course, the other side was not it at all. It was symphonic, a pretty girl is like a melody, whatever, for stripping. So anyway, this was a conversation piece. This is a record I never would have danced to. It was not what it was for. And people have to realize that if you pick up a record like that's mostly something campy, it is not for the ethnic dance club. They catered their music to the immigrant that missed, the old country. They missed the old country. They missed their songs and their music. They came there, and these other folks that were jazz musicians, rock musicians, and so on, they thought it was interesting, because here's all this syncopated, kind of different, the quarter tones were far out. They thought it was really interesting. So they came. they came to see the authentic music, and then it kind of, inspired some of them to do pieces in their own realm inspired by the belly dance clubs. And as far as the belly dancing and the musicians, I could say a lot more about that because I may not do it right now, but you have to realize that the belly dancers were here in America because of the thriving ethnic club scene. They were making money here. There was a reason to come here. Now there is not one reason on earth to come to America and belly dance. Not one reason, even if, in fact, over there, it's not doing, there's nothing like what it was like, especially the golden age, height of excitement, 50s and 60s. Uh, and there's just a lot more I could say about that, but I'm going to stop that part right here. The camping, um, music put on records was really for another audience. It was a pseudo thing. It was never meant to be in the ethnic nightclubs. An example, in the documentary, there's a dancer called Lorraine Chalhoub, who's a very wonderful dancer, also a very nice girl. My mother knew her, although she knew her uh, a little bit later from the flyers they're showing this documentary. She knew her when uh, Lorraine had gotten an agent because she wanted to do a lot of different things, kind of maybe in a vein of being known more like Nejla Tess, like do a lot of different things. She got an agent. And he said, I'm going to call you Little Egypt and say you are the granddaughter of Farida Mazar Sparopoulos, who, at the time they felt was the Little Egypt from the World's Fair, back in the turn of the century uh, in Chicago. And so they told the press this is Little Egypt's granddaughter, and she's like Little Egypt the Third or whatever. Somebody found out that Farida Mazar Sparopoulos did not have children. So they were like, no, you made this up for publicity. It's not true. But during her, so that kind of thing kind of went by the wayside. But Lorraine, who my mother knew briefly there, they crossed paths as many did. She didn't know her that well because Lorraine had started before my mom, but she thought she was Italian. She really did not know her real name. She only knew her as Little Egypt at the time. And so anyway, she did keep the name Little Egypt and ended up on Batman. She did, I think, a few films and so on. So she did fine, despite the fact that. But what I'm getting to is one of the things she did as Little Egypt was hook up with an orchestra that was called the Sonny Lester Orchestra. And some people are saying now they don't think that was his real name either, that was a moniker, a faux moniker. So they did these, series of things that were campy. His music, by the way, was campy, orchestral, trying to sound like Middle Eastern music with a little bit of, symphonic orchestra and jazz thrown in. This existed, but again, I'm trying to tell you, I did not grow up dancing to this music in ethnic clubs. Not even close. In fact, most of the banquets that I belly danced at and my mother did, there were authentic orchestras. Mike Sarkissian, uh, in Boston, and like I said, to a degree, Freddie, they had this alternate style and type of show that they probably mostly did, actually, I'm thinking too, for Las Vegas. They went and worked in Las Vegas and had a Oriental themed, okay, more of an Americanized stage show to a degree. I don't want to say it was all American, that's not fair, but meaning their approach. And that was for a casino. So that's the problem with this little Mohammed El-Bakker documentary I watched. This is like my main thing, is that the campy pseudo stuff, that's like a whole nother thing. But there were very sophisticated Americans that really, they wanted to hear the real thing. They thought, wow, that's great. If you had said, oh no, you won't like this, I'm gonna Americanize this for you, they probably wouldn't have been as interested, really, because I'm talking about very artistic people. And as far as the gentleman who seems very talented, I wish I could get his name here, well, I'll add it in the notes, who worked with El-Bakker, who had said he really didn't like, the albums were, especially the liner notes, really, I mean, were pretty bad. Yes, the liner notes about, prostitution or whatever. That's very unfortunate that ended up on El-Bakkar's albums. It said this African American musician that played the oud became a Muslim and was a little bit, he was peeved with the more salacious stuff on those albums. I hate that. I hate that, because the liner notes sometimes were decent on a belly dance record, or they weren't. They were just something so outrageous. You're like, oh my, because then you might be surprised some of the albums with really horrible liner notes. Sometimes the music was just beautiful, like something recorded in, Turkey or Lebanon or somewhere. You're like, my God, that's beautiful. The liner notes are just really ridiculous. So that varied also. But no one wore pasties, by the way. Nobody wore pasties or in any of the Greek nightclubs or Arabic nightclubs for that matter in New York City. You did not see that. If they wore pasties, if somebody did, they were in an American club somewhere doing that. They were not in Greektown. And you had to have a skirt that had a panel in the front that, you couldn't, like, for instance, show up in one of the Latin type, rumba type mambo outfits where a brief showed in the front and the ruffles came up the side. No, 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 no. You were told there, when you got there, you had to have a front panel. No crotch exposing, not even close. So, you saw cleavage, okay. But, it wasn't, these were not strippers. They did not come out and they didn't do anything like that. So, and as far as costuming, don't forget, if you go back to art created by Middle Eastern people, not by foreigners, but by Middle Eastern people, including Persians, you will see varying types of Oriental outfits with pillbox hats, varying types of little vests, different types of waist ties, belts, girdles, or that they used to also in English language refer to ancient belts as a girdle. Anyway, my point is the clubs in New York, with the kind of music they had, which was so beautiful because they had all the best people from these foreign countries. I mean, the cream of the crop. These people created music that was like paradise. It wasn't like you were stepping into another world, but it was a world that we created. The West did not create us. The Middle Eastern person and their outfits, their fantasies, their dreams, we created that in our own stories and poetry. And if it some people got fascinated with it and maybe it got corrupted a little or overused or whatever, we are the creators of our destiny. And the other stuff, like say an American movie once in a while, might have it in there, might have a really good dancer and authentic. Another time you might see something where it's like, my God, that's not belly dancing. I mean, it varied. It varied by movie. It varied by who was in charge of the picking out of who was going to be in it or direct the dance scene. So that's part of what I have to say about the El-Bakker documentary. I don't think it, well, and also too, in New York City, we had belly dance, Middle Eastern nightclubs before the Cayenne opened in Boston. So that's just a little technicality, no offense at all to them. But we had, well, for one, we had Marika's, which I believe her name is Marika Papagica, possibly. The singer, I think of her first name, I don't remember her last name, that was featured in the movie Rembetico. As far as I know, that is the same Marika that had a nightclub, excuse me, had a nightclub near the old New York Times building, which would not have been in the modern Greektown, but somewhere else in Manhattan. And you also had some Romanian Balkan type nightclubs in lower Manhattan, like way back, like around, say, Mott and Orchard Street, not too far from the old Jewish neighborhood. Really part of one and the same. And there were belly dancers performing in costume, albeit I believe their belly button was covered, in harem pants, a little vest, playing Zell with a little hat on, with the authentic, musicians in the background. This goes back to like the 30s or earlier, late 30s or earlier. And the Egyptian Gardens Greek nightclub in Greektown in New York also goes back to, you know, way back, like maybe the 20s, I'm not sure, at least probably the late 30s at least. And they went through a phase where now they did not have costume dancers as far as they had belly dancers do their act in evening gowns, as I understand that, early on, or at least for a period. Now they may have had them in the outfit like this other girl on, like I said, down there at Mott Street or whatever, and then maybe they quit having it and said, why don't you wear an evening gown? Who knows? I do know that in the 50s, when they weren't wearing a costume, at some point, Nico Porporaki, Nikos Dakis, he said, why don't you have them wear a costume? So he had them, he made his recommendation and they took it. And of course, then they started wearing costumes. And I was going to mention that as far as what they were made of, there was some discussion online about beads and coins where people either had a coin costume or actually, again, the foreign performers were already wearing very heavily beaded costumes. In fact, they even knew how to crochet with beads. And you have to remember that the finest beads, period, even today, are from Czechoslovakia. Okay, and you had your trading with Turkey. I've seen photos of very heavily beaded costumes, uh, like with the Turks, well, and or maybe to a degree some of the Arab countries, but especially I'm remembering the Turks way back. I mean, not like just the other day or in the 50s or whatever. I mean, way back, like when they first started photography, and or like early 20th century, some of the performers had a lot of beading, on their different accoutrements, whether it was on a hip belt, on a scarf on their head, or, their vest or bra or whatever. And the finest beads were from Czechoslovakia. So you have to remember, Istanbul was a trade area where a lot of this stuff came in. And this really had nothing to do with strippers at all. Like say, well, did they wear beads too? Well, to be honest with you, the shoes on the other foot. Belly dancers weren't so much copying a striptease artist as a striptease artist started copying some of the accoutrements that like were there like on people from Turkey, wearing those things. It's not really interchangeable. The two art forms are not the same, but yes, either way you could figure that somebody wearing just say rayon fringe, it was considered a little bit, cheap or not as fine, let's say, as if they had their checked glass beads, on their outfit. And you could say that would be the same, for any type of dance or even from another genre. The more real beads you had, it would be, you're considered a higher end, it would be higher end looking or more couture than just anything, just rayon fringe. So hopefully that clears up some issues about beads and coins. They're both nice. We wore them both. I mean, but no, none of our outfits were pornographic. You couldn't get away with that. Now maybe you can. Some places, but you can't do that in an ethnic nightclub. So anyway, that's sort of what I had to say about the El-Bakker documentary. I liked it, but oh dear, it just made the nightclub scene like a bunch of people just being cheesy just to please the Western eye and ear, and that is not the case. So anyway, thank you for listening. And if I forgot something, I'll write it underneath or do a separate video. Bye.